Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're looking at this no ID Phalaenopsis orchid from my local grocery store. This is a no ID, but it has a super vigorous growing pattern in terms of leaf growth as well as blooms. And this video is all about actually how I took care of it and the kind of things that I did and not do, and my opinions about not doing certain things is probably better for your orchid. So if I go back in time, I think I bought this orchid around end of 2017 or beginning of 2018, somewhere around there. And this past winter was when it rebloomed. So after all the flowers finished the first time, after I bought it from the stores, I kept the spike, but I did trim off the tip of the spikes because I didn't think that this particular orchid is a sequential bloomer where the flower spike will continue to elongate. I didn't think it's like that, because usually complex hybrid that we get from grocery stores, they're complex hybrid and they don't have that kind of sequential blooming capability. So I went ahead and trimmed off the tip of the flower spike, and the place that I like to trim is typically just right after where the first flower on the spike is. Right, usually the first flower of the spike, the bloom, is usually the biggest flower, and then gradually toward the end of the spike you will have smaller flowers. So it's at just right under the biggest flower, where the biggest flower was. I trimmed it. So it originally had 2 spikes, and over the winter both spikes put out 2 secondary spikes, so a total of 4. And then pretty soon I also realized that it was shooting out a primary spike from the base. So all together this flower produced 5 spikes, 4 secondary and 1 primary, and for a total of 12 buds. But the first bud, the oldest bud, blasted because I was away, and I think at the time either the humidity was super low or the temperature was just too low for that first bud to continue to develop. So you probably already saw a picture from earlier that it was that yellow, there was a bud blast. But then for the rest of the 11 buds, they continued to grow and everything was just okay, was doing well. It was doing very well actually. So now, hence today, we are watching this video and for me to share with you the kind of blooms that it has produced. My care for this orchid is rather simple. I would give it quarter strength fertilizer pretty much every week, but once a month I do use just clean water, pure water, and the water I use is reverse osmosis water. I soak it to make sure that I dissolve any salt buildup or any unnecessary substance that really needs to be flushed away. I use the soaking method first, and then I would just drain it from there. This orchid is still potted in the original bark chip and sphagnum moss mix, and I did not repot it. I did not repot this orchid right away because at the time it had just finished blooming, and I looked at the media. It looked quite okay, and it had already been at my place for quite some time when the flowers were finished, and I didn't see any signs of pest infestation or any kind of media issue with insects. So I didn't want to disturb the orchid because at the time it was still not a very good, it's not the right season to repot. So I thought, might as well wait until spring. But because it just, started to produce secondary spikes and a primary spike, that I thought to myself, you know what, I just need to continue to let it be, because what if I, don't do a good job repotting this orchid, I'll set back this orchid greatly, and I may not be able to enjoy all these blooms from the secondary spikes and primary spike. So the outer cup, the transparent plastic cup that I put this orchid in, it's a 16-ounce plastic cup, and I use it for two purposes. The first purpose is that it kind of provides that natural barrier between this orchid media and other orchids media, because they're all placed on a flat surface, and without this outer cup, it's much easier for any bug or any kind of fungus spores to travel. But using this cup, there is somewhat of a separation between other orchids nearby. I'm not saying that, this is a 100% proof of any kind of pest or fungus migration, but at least it's some kind of barrier. But the second purpose is also, I use this cup for soaking. Even if I'm only adding a little bit of water with fertilizer, I usually just add to the water level is usually around 1/4, right, from the bottom, and then I just let it soak until I remember, and sometimes that's about an hour, right? And enough water will get wicked up. So a lot of the times, if I use my finger and just touch the very top portion of the media, it's moist, right? So it's a way to conserve water as well as fertilizer and effort, because I don't always need to always fill up the cup with water and with fertilizer up until like the 80 or 90% level of the entire inner cup. It's not necessary, and usually when I go up to 80% or 90% of the entire inner cup level, that's when I am soaking with just pure water. So that I only do that for flushing purposes, but otherwise, typically nowadays anyway, for most of my orchids, if I don't need to, I don't want a water level that's too high, because it's a waste of water, and once the media is so saturated, it's just not going to take any more water, so you ended up having to throw away dump out a lot of water that's unused. And following is just my personal opinion. It's not right or wrong, but it's how I see certain things, because I don't always repot orchids right away unless I see clear signs of problem. And when I say problem, it's usually, either it has serious bug problem, mealybug problem, or obvious sign of root rot. I don't always repot just because I think the media is broken down. And I have seen a lot of Facebook posts, right? New orchid growers or just orchid growers with new orchids, and they're so eager to repot their orchids because they want to change their orchids into the media of their choice. And they do that, and then they would say, I just repotted all these orchids because I just bought this orchid and the media is so broken down. Usually 8 or 9 times out of 10, I look at the picture and I looked at the media. I don't think those media is too broken down. And if you just keep it, unless there is any pest problem or bug problem, otherwise, if you keep it on the dry side, it's gonna slow down the degrading process until you have until the season is right, until your orchid is fully adapted to your environment, and then you do the repot. I personally think that would be the better way to go, because otherwise your orchid is really you're throwing many different aspects of change at your orchid at the same time. Change of environment, change of new media, and also is probably somewhat disturbed because you had to clean away the old media and then add the new media. And what if your repot method is not somehow optimal, and then you're running the risk of setting back the orchid, or sometimes both setting back the orchid by damaging the roots, as well as introducing too many new environment factors for your orchid to get accustomed to. So my personal opinion really is that unless you really absolutely have to repot, don't feel you have to repot just because you think the media is broken down. Just give it less water, right? And these orchids, they actually thrive without too much water. So that's just something that I have seen, and I've always thought to myself, I would have waited. So just something for you to think about. But back to this orchid. Overall, I'm really satisfied with this orchid's performance this year. It's totally a record-setting secondary spikes that I can ever get out of one single orchid. Especially, it also put out a primary spike. The flower count is to be desired because it's only a total of 11, but considering those are coming mostly from secondary spikes, so it's okay. And it's a mid-sized orchid, so I'm still pretty pleased with this result. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!